continue a series of sermons on the authority of Jesus. Remember, we all have a skeptical nature. We don't all believe everything we hear. But in the first generation, when Jesus of Nazareth walked about making claims to be the Messiah, something made people cross over from skepticism to believer. And the eyewitnesses say it was the authority that he had. He was not like other people. He had authority. There seemed to be a weight behind his words, a meaningness, an ethos, that when he spoke, it happened. And so the gospel writer John does a better job than others of taking these signs of God's authority. Other gospel writers call them miracles. John calls them signs. At the beginning of Lent, we talked about how Jesus turned the water into wine. And that was how he indicated his authority, the difference that he makes, even at the molecular level. Torch stepped up the next week and preached a very fine message about Jesus healing the centurion's son. And again, even distance is not important to the authority and the power of Jesus. You can be on the other side of the planet, the other side of whatever. You're not out of reach of God's authority through Jesus Christ. The week after that, we spoke of the healing of the man by the pool. 38 years he had been lying there in paralysis. But even time and even atrophy doesn't stand up to the authority of Jesus. Then the youth came along, and along with Theo and Michaela, a great message went out reminding us of the centrality of the love of Jesus Christ. And today we're going to talk about Jesus feeding the multitude, the feeding of the 5,000. Some of you might have grown up calling that the multiplication of the loaves and the fishes. It's a sermon entitled The Fourth Sign. The Fourth Sign. These are going to go all the way through to Easter Sunday. But in the name of bringing this up, I bring up attention. When I was a high school student, I worked at Disney World. Disney had a special form of employment where high school kids could come and work for them on weekends and holidays. So on the weekends, that's what I did. And during spring break, during Christmas break, and even during summer, I drove over to Disney and went to work. Thing is, when you work weekends and holidays, guess what? You're working in the busiest days of Disney traffic too. And I worked in a little refreshment stand that sold hot dogs and pretzels. And we sold Coca-Cola. We sold, believe it or not, coffee and hot chocolate. And it was, like I said, always on the busiest business days at Disney. So I would be selling my wares there to these extremely long lines of tourists. They were either hot and sweaty or wet and cold because it was raining. And so they were grumpy because they were hungry. And they knew they were going to have to pay way too much for what I was selling. And guess who they took that angst out on? Me. And there would be times, especially late at night, when we started to downsize the employees on the shift. We were actually starting to clean up, and it would actually rain. And it was then that the tourists would come into our shop to get away from the rain, and then want something warm to drink. And we could only make coffee one pot at a time. And we could only make hot chocolate, what these tourists call hot chocolate. We could only make that one cup at a time. So, I was set up to disappoint people. And sure enough, it would get tense. Why? Because you couldn't meet everyone's needs when they wanted them met. And maybe there's situations in your life where you've had to meet the needs or the expectations of a job description or your value system or your convictions. And you just couldn't do it. You didn't have the wherewithal. You didn't have the resource. You didn't have the time. You didn't have the energy. And you're suffering because you couldn't, meet all that expectation. We want to see how Jesus went about that, because Jesus meets a multitude. We find out that he's been healing in the Galilean countryside, and people have been coming from far and wide to see the release of his power, the release of his authority, the healing that he's bringing them. And at this point, they're following because they need healing. Jesus, give me something. You obviously have something that I need. Give it to me. And there they show up. And they listen to him for hours. Some think even days. Gets a little hungry. They get hungry after a while. And that's where the conversation gets really, really interesting. The story gets really, really interesting. Read the Word of God with me. After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. Lifting up his eyes then, and seeing that a large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, "Gather up the leftover fragments, that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. May God add his blessings to the reading, the preaching, the hearing, most importantly, the living of God's living Word. Amen. We just read together the story of the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus feeding 5,000 men. Israel would not have counted the women and children. So it was a lot more than 5,000. Jesus fed them with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. Now, I think that really happened. What about you? Yes? Any no's out there? Okay. Now, I believe he multiplied those loaves and fishes. There's a school of thought out there that says, let's try and explain away everything that is supernatural and use only naturalistic explanations. That's a school of thought that says, well, when people saw Jesus being generous like this, it inspired their own generosity, so people went to their own private stash of food, their own lunch that they had hidden away in their robes, and they broke all that. And coincidentally, it too was bread and fish. And afterwards, that's why something was left over. I don't believe that. I believe that Jesus, out of his big heart and out of his divine power, multiplied loaves and fishes. This happened in a place called Tabitha, which is on the northwestern shore of the Sea of Galilee. The group is going from, still space to go to Israel? Yeah. Still? If you want to go see this place, you want to go stand at a spot? You'll find the floor of an old chapel that was built in the 3rd century. Christians were already worshiping in that spot, worshiping Jesus as Lord, and celebrating celebrating the fact that he had broken the bread and the loaves and the fishes. And that you can go stand. I got to visit there once myself. Very inspiring. I hope you'll do that too. See Bob if you want to do that. If you're looking to up your devotional life, see Bob about that. Now, the loaves and fishes. This is a classic story, and I want us to be able to apply it to our everyday life. Because, well, there's a multitude of people that want to eat. Eating's important. I don't need to tell you that. And some of you are thinking about where you're going to have lunch today. I can tell it on your face. I'm thinking about dinner tonight already. No, seriously, my daughter is home right now, and she's going to be heading back from spring break. She's leaving late this afternoon, and I'm thinking about having one final meal with her. Duke, stand up. That's Duke Antonelli. He also came down with my daughter for spring break. He came down here to get to know me better. There are people who don't believe, or people who look beyond it for some various reasons, several faulty ones, no good ones. They too are looking for a nourishment, but they find themselves looking for something fast. Almost like they call the West this collection of fast food nations. People that look for a quick fill, for something that's almost null and void when it comes to nutritional value. The word of Jesus Christ is that living bread. It's what the people, they thought they were going there to see healings. They were receiving the living bread of Jesus Christ. The story is also told about a disciple by the curious name of Philip, who Jesus approaches and said, plays a mind game with. There's a bunch of hungry people out there. How do you think we can feed them? A lot of Bible scholars think that Jesus went to Philip because Philip grew up very close to this place. Grew up in Bethsaida down by the coast. And he would have known the fishermen and the fish markets. He would have known the bakers. He would have known several people in the crowd. So his mind begins to work, and it begins to work pragmatically too. How can we go about feeding them like this? And how much would it cost for everyone to have just one morsel? And I'm going to stand before you and say, I appreciate that pragmatic voice. I appreciate the Philips of the church. I appreciate those ones who start thinking, what can we do? And how can we do it? And how can we do it responsibly? There are frequently voices in the church that come back and say, no, let's operate by faith and let's overextend ourselves and put God on the spot. When that happens, great. Glory to God. But when it doesn't happen, there the tension lies. So Philip begins to think about about what 200 denarii would have been about 6 months' salary for someone who caught fish on the Sea of Galilee. And half a year of his work would have only bought everyone one little nibble of bread. And comes a time when the church, especially when it's speaking of the love of Jesus Christ, the grace of Jesus Christ, we need to think about something more than a morsel. We need to think of the fullness of the Spirit. We need to think of the fullness of the truth that we can distribute, that we can share. And it's Andrew who walks up and introduces Jesus to a little boy who has a very small meal of 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. And again, this is a crowd that's coming to say, Jesus, what can you do for me? But one boy, one child, has something he can give to Jesus, that he can give to the cause, that he can give to everybody. I like to call that buy-in. Some people call it having skin in the game. Let me try at best to illustrate what I mean by that. We've noticed, this being Youth Sunday, we like to help raise money to scholarship young people to go on mission trips. We've noticed that if we pay their way to mission trips, they don't do much mission work. You know what they do? They vacation. That's what it's treated like. But if they have some buy-in, if they have some skin in the game, if they've earned some of those monies that go that way, they treat it very differently. They quit treating it like a vacation. They treat it like a mission project. Why? They've invested themselves in it like that. This little boy put some skin in the game. He put some buy-in by giving some bread and some fish. But even Andrew, even Simon Peter's brother Andrew realizes this isn't going to be much at all. It isn't. But it's that buy-in that Jesus takes to work his miracle through, to display the sign of his authority. He takes it and lifts it up and has the Father bless it. And that's when things change. That's when things begin to multiply. As a matter of fact, we don't really know when it multiplies. Did it happen right there in Jesus' hand? Obviously, that's when the blessing got put out on it. Did it happen during the distribution of it all? And that's my guess, because it's not until it's collected that we realize that there's an abundance, far more brought in than what went out. What was originally given. And so, I say again, it's the servants of Jesus Christ that are blessed to see the wonderment as servants at the distribution. We had a sermon together several months ago about the prodigal son, about how the prodigal came back from that far country, and it was the servants who knew where the fatted calf was. It was servants who knew where that new robe was, and that finger, and the rings for the fingers, and it was the servants that knew where to get those sandals, and it was the servants that knew how to put on that great banquet to welcome him home. Music, dancing, festivity. It was the servants who knew. Just a couple of weeks ago, we talked about Jesus turning water into wine. And again, it was the servants who had the front row view of the whole thing. Did they have to do the drudgery work of drawing water from the well and filling up stone jars? Yes. Did they even have a task to do by dipping that water and taking it to the steward of the banquet? Yes, but they're the ones that witnessed the miracle, the water turned into wine. And now they get to see the miracle yet again of distributing and then collecting all these leftovers of bread and fish. How beautiful! How beautiful it was that they got to see that. And again, if turning water into wine was a miracle at the molecular level, this is one that deals with mass. I know there are people who walk around and say, hey, matter is neither created nor destroyed. Well, I can think of an instance where it was. No, there are only there's a finite number of molecules within bread and within fish, within this offering of carbohydrate and protein. But that limitation doesn't seem to impress Jesus of Nazareth one bit. If you want to walk up to the manifestation of the Creator and say, the rules say nothing's ever created more than what is. Well, it didn't impress Jesus at all. He rolled that rule right away, right out the window, making it increase. And a multitude was fed, and more was collected, even after it was consumed, than went out. And I think that's beautiful. Now, how does this apply to us today in March 2015 at 1500 Counter Highway? How does that apply? How can it? And may I please offer a for instance? It's Lenten season. Church leadership got together and said, why don't we invite people to church on Easter? And why don't we even set a goal? Why don't we set a goal for 1,500 people? I know it shouldn't be about numbers, but we need to have a metric. 1,500 people. Anyone going to do that? Anyone going to invite? 2, 3? Wow. Okay, we've got one, I think, 4. We've got 5. Oh, you're just scratching your head. Okay, we've got a little more so right here. I wonder if the rest of us can. Maybe put a little buy-in. You know, the goal is more than twice of our average worship attendance. I know pragmatic voices could look at me and say, Philip, you're setting us up to fail. I believe in a God who can do a lot more. I also sit there and say, look at our assembled church. Even our assembled, all of our membership combined, even for the people who we don't see that often, we only make up about 2% of the population of this county. Can God use that to reach this county? And it's feeding the 5,000 that tells us so. God can use us. Using us with some buy-in. I read a story of a missionary, an urban missionary, a missionary whose setting was the inner city. He was walking home from his ministry site one evening, and he was hungry, and he only had $5 in his pocket, and he went by a burger joint. Saw that he could get 2 hamburgers for the price of 1. Saw that he could get 2 hamburgers for $5. Walked in there, but as he was walking into the parking lot, there was a teenage boy standing there, looked hungry, and the voice of God spoke to him and said, "You're only going to eat 1 hamburger tonight. You're going to share the other." And it was right in closing time, and he went there and purchased his hamburgers. And when he came back out, that one boy had been